Good evening and welcome to the Catholic Mom Book Club. This fall we are doing a fiction book. It's called In Pieces. It is out from Chrism Press and we are joined tonight by its sorry, my New England shows, it happens all the time. The author is here. Rhonda Ortiz. Rhonda, I'm going to start with you tonight. I want you all to introduce yourselves. You all have such you've varied roles, and you just all do some amazing things. So I'd love for you to introduce yourselves. We'll start with you, Rhonda.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Allison. So I'm Rhonda Ortiz. I wrote this book that we are reading. It's called In Pieces. It is historical fiction set in 1793. That's when it opens. Its second book is also out, which is Adrift. So if you like this one, you can keep reading. So yeah, I am the author tonight, and I'll let Karen go next.
Hi, I'm Karen Yulo. I am the editorial director of Chrism Press. So I am basically oversee our content and, making sure that everything is upholding to our mission and our standards, as well as doing an awful lot of editing myself. I did not edit In Pieces, but I was both the developmental and the line editor for Adrift for the second book in the series. So I know Molly very well as well.
Karen, can you just explain the difference in those different kinds of editors for those who aren't familiar with publishing?
Sure. Developmental editing is big picture stuff. So it's how the plot works, it's characterization, it's structure, it's big stuff. And line editing is going through literally line by line and making sure that the prose is as clean and crisp and flows really well and really means what it needs to mean at that level.
Thank you. And with us also tonight.
Hi, everybody. I am Marissa Stokely. I've been with Whitefire Publishing Group since 2014. I currently oversee the entire house and all of its imprints as the associate publisher, and for Chrism Press in particular, that entails being one of the managing editors. For In Pieces in particular, I did the developmental edit for Rhonda. Also got to know Molly very well, and was fortunate enough to be able to follow up on Adrift with the line edits. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight with all of you, especially to talk with Karen and Rhonda as the co-project people on this book.
This is exciting. Now, we keep talking about Molly. So for those who are joining us for the first week and just kind of stumbled across us, just kind of a little quick synopsis of who is Molly?
Okay, I think that's my job. Molly Chase. This is the Molly Chase series in Pieces. Tonight's book. I got to keep holding up this lovely cover. In Pieces is the first book in the series. It's the central character is a young woman named Molly Chase. She is she's in her early 20s. She is a Bostonian. And again, this book opens in 1793. And we open the story about 6-8 weeks after the suicide death of her father. Her father committed suicide. She found the body. It's a very awful way to open a story. Very awful circumstances. The book happens to be also, but it goes into a lot of deep stuff like that, but it also happens to be very funny. So it's a story. It's a love story primarily about her with a childhood friend of hers, Josiah Robb, and but it also is a family drama, society drama. There's a political suspense plot. The second book, Adrift, especially becomes an espionage plot, and there's a pretty strong religious drama as well. Simply because it's 1793 Boston, like religion is it. Like there are religions. We talked about that last week. So that is what the story is, kind of in a nutshell.
And I'm pretty sure back in 1793, the Bostonians hadn't yet lost their R's. Just throwing that out there.
I don't know.
Pretty sure. And if you're wondering what,
They probably still sounded British.
Probably,
wow,
yeah,
they
a bit,
probably
yeah. I mean, I
did.
mentioned, yeah. I mean, I think they have it. They have an accent. I'm pretty sure, but yeah, they probably have retained some of their British vowels.
Yeah, we threw
Yeah,
away
I mean,
the.
it's less than 20 years since they were British subjects. So,
Right,
That
but
makes sense.
it depends on how long they've been. How long they've been in
right, how
on this
long
side
they've
of
been across
the
the
pond.
pond.
How many generations down are you? Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
we threw out all the T and the R's. It's just what we do.
Tea is very
So
important in this part of the book. Yes.
yes, it is. Yes, it is. So let's dive in there, and you all can decide. You can all talk about it, or you can take turns. But let's just give a brief kind of overview to orient our readers on today's lesson. Listen to me. Today's session on part 2, a summary of In Pieces.
Yeah, sure. So we ended part 1. Josiah has taken Molly home to be cared for by his mother. This has already started to stir some society stuff. There's also like a little bit of a job kind of question, this political suspense. Josiah is asked to carry a letter to Charleston when his ship goes to Charleston, and they're going to Charleston and then to Philadelphia. So he's asked to carry this letter to Philadelphia to be delivered to somebody who works for President Washington. At the time, in 1793, the capital of the United States was Philadelphia, because Washington had not yet been built. So it did exist. Like, they had already done the legislation for it. So anyway, so Josiah has, at the end of part 1, or at the beginning of part 2, he leaves for Charleston, and we are left with the women in the house. And all of a sudden, everything starts going to pot. So that is kind of where we're at. We have the rival entering, Daniel Warren, and we see a lot of Daniel from the viewpoint of his sister, who is Molly's friend, his sister Prudence, and we get a lot of like, Josiah has purchased at the end of book 1 or part 1. Josiah purchased Molly a cloth because Molly would like to. She's a talented mantua maker, seamstress. She would like to start doing that. Trying to earn a living, like trying to get better. This is something that Josiah's mother is encouraging as well. And Josiah says, "Okay, I'll buy you all the cloth in your father's warehouse that you ordered on his behalf. That's the one you would like." And he spends a ton of money on this. And this sends all of the gossips into a Twitter. And so, yeah, so they end up talking. Everybody starts talking, and it gets really ugly. And Molly's trying to figure out, how do I solve this problem? Now, Molly is grieving. Molly's not thinking clearly. And she's got some friends who have varying opinions on how to approach this thing. So that is part 2. And that's where we are at with that.
And I just want to invite those who are watching, if you're watching live, that you can make a comment, ask a question at any point. I can relay that to anybody here on the team to answer. And we really hope that you will consider being interactive and sharing your thoughts on the book or any questions that you have. Now, Rhonda, you talked about friendship. That's like kind of a big theme of this week's session, of this week's reading that we did. Tell us a little bit about Molly's friends. Like, what kind of like characters did you put around our main character? Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like it. So one of the things I remember, Marisa, when we were doing developmental edits on the book, I remember you had a line. I don't know if it was when we were talking in person or when you sent your editorial letter, but you said, "Oh, this sounds just like a group of girlfriends."
Absolutely.
And I was like, yes, I got it. All right, good.
You did so well with that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the girlfriends.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think firstly, fundamentally, the first friends that we sort of meet in this book are the Robs themselves, the Rob family, and Josiah in particular. And Josiah fills so many different roles in Molly's life, and friend is one of them. And then his mother, his sister, these are the friends that she's turning to most immediately, right, in the moment of crisis. And then we have the next ring of friends, which is all the girlfriends. And they are not aware of what has happened to her father. They are not aware that she is having these like out of mind experiences. She's these PTSD flashbacks, so just use, Josiah calls them lapses. That's the word I always think about them. Lapses. She's having these lapses, right? She's having waking nightmares. She's having sleeping nightmares. So they're not aware of this. They're not aware of the circumstances. All they see is her father died, and we got a problem to solve because now she has no money. And her way of solving this is to say, I'm going to do something with my life, but not everybody's agreeing with that. So we have a couple of different sets of friends. We have, the girlfriends are formed by, generally there's three girlfriends. There's Prudence Warren, who says all the snarky things I wish I could say myself. I know, like, this is like the character, like
we love Prudence.
I know.
That's why we love Prudence.
I love Prudence. Oh my gosh, I love Prudence. And she's so fun to write. And I'm not this kind of person, but she is. She's fun to write. And we get a lot of Prudence because we do have her point of view. And then we have Joy Christensen. This is, as I mentioned, last week, I actually modeled Joy Christensen on my real life sister. So my sister is Christine Joy Christensen. I just flipped it. So anyway, so this is just a little like insider glimpse. But anyway, it's her friend. She's sunny and cheerful and confident and fashionista and a little clumsy. And my sister is like, yeah, thanks for calling me out. And and then the third girlfriend in the group is Tabitha Breyer, who is everybody's favorite ditz, but she's actually surprisingly accurate with her assessments of how things are working and what's going on. So she's like a truth teller in the most obnoxious way. And as Molly says, she's sweet but feather-brained. But she also says, and she was intensely jealous, but Molly chose to ignore it. So, so there's this dynamic of, there's a lot going on, I think, with Tabitha. There's also a fourth woman about their age. She's kind of on the periphery. She does enter into the story as the series goes along. There's an Anne Lawrence, and she's older. She's probably about 28, 29. She's unmarried, little spinster, and she is the sister of Peter Lawrence, who is Prudence's mother. Mrs. Warren is trying to set her up with Peter Lawrence, and Prudence is, thinks this is her brother's lackey, and he's rat-faced and she hates him. And then the sugar, she's part of the Lawrence family is a major merchant in town. And so we are entering some different dynamics there along the town.
So yeah, I have a question for Karen and Marisa before and Lisa has a question for you, Rhonda, but you both got very excited and you're both like, we love Prudence. I would love to know from both of you, because clearly that was quite a reaction. I'll start with you. What is it about this character that you really like? You got pretty enthusiastic. Like, I want to know why.
Well, Prudence. Well, I can't. First of all, I'll just say that Prudence is even more awesome in Adrift in the second book, but she's pretty darn awesome in Pieces too. She is the character who speaks her mind. She is the character. She is intensely scientific, which I am not, but she has this. She's a botanist, and she is very dedicated to studying plants. And, you know, she's always drawing or the plants, or she's got her scalpel out or something like that, which is completely not what you expect from an 18th century Boston woman. And of course, she bears the brunt of that. And her mother in particular cannot stand the fact that she has a botanist for a daughter. And Prudence is just like, whatever, mother, you know, like she's just sort of the woman that in many ways we all wish we could be, because she just like, she stands up for herself without having to like really be forceful and obnoxious. That's just who she is, and she's gonna just be herself. And it gets, like I said, it gets even better how she stands up to just be herself in Adrift in the second book. But even in this one, she's also Molly's dearest, she's also Molly's truest friend in a sense. Joy Christensen is a very good friend as well, but Prudence is really willing to put herself on the line for Molly's sake.
Yeah, I love that
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so she's a very lovable character in that respect as well.
Marisa, what about you?
So, in addition to everything that Karen said, because I agreed with every word, you know, what comes to mind for me when I think of Prudence is she is spunky, she is strong, she's also so good-hearted, which again we'll continue to see throughout the series. I in particular loved that as her story goes on, she fights for her good ending. I don't want to say happy ending exactly, because she goes through a lot, but it is such a joy to watch her story unfold on the page as she tries to find her place in her family, stand up against her brother, figure out how to best work within the dynamics of her family. And in many ways, she reminds me of another version of Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, because she is such a strong, outspoken female, which is not common in those days. And truthfully, when editing both of the books that Rhonda wrote, Prudence's scenes were the ones that really made me come alive in my seat and just want to race through the lines, you know, even though I couldn't. But it's like I just loved reading her scenes so much, and I wanted more of them.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too with Prudence is that, like Karen said, she's a devoted friend to Molly. I mean, it's interesting, like, you know, how that plays out in pieces, because she doesn't like Josiah. And that is a really interesting dynamic. And Tabitha says, you're still jealous, you know, like, and not just in a friendship way, you know, it's like Molly is closer to Josiah than she is to Prudence. And so there's a point of maybe not insecurity, but just a sense of like, you know, she's devoted to this woman, but like there's a sense of like she wants more from the friendship perhaps than Molly necessarily gives her. But that is something that I think is going to develop over the course of the series, and especially as Prudence's brother enters in as the rival.
So I'm going to ask you Lisa's question.
Because that is, and of course,
go ahead, Karen. Sorry,
I think that
delay in the technology. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to point out that Prudence's brother is the villain of In Pieces. You know, he is Josiah's romantic rival, and he is not a good man. And I love that dynamic, that Prudence is really fighting for what's right against her own family.
Yeah. So I have a question from Lisa, and then I have a question for all of you. In this idea of characters that we like to read about. So let's start with Lisa's question. This is for you, Rhonda. Do you consult your friends or loved ones before basing a character on them? Or do you share only if the person who inspired the character asks you? This is from Lisa Henry.
Well, and I think, you know, we did touch a little bit on this last time, but I will, with my sister, it was more of like affection. I wanted to write her into the book, and I don't mind telling her, because Joy Christensen she's not a major character, and so everything about Joy is mostly just endearing, and so in that sense, like, I don't actually mind. I'm just gonna write her in. It's just for fun. I actually also slipped in a line for there's actually other things that I've slipped in for family. I slipped in I slipped my sister-in-law in there very briefly, right at the beginning, first chapter. I also wrote Filippo for my mother-in-law, who is New York Neapolitan Italian. And that was how Filippo came about. Josiah needs more friends, and it's like shipmates, and I was like, who is this shipmate going to be? And for some reason, it was like in my head, I was like, I should write one for my mother-in-law. So like, that's how Filippo initially began, as just an idea.
Well, Rhonda, that just made my night, because I love Filippo, and now I'm going to think about your mother-in-law.
I know there's a deleted scene somewhere from like 18 billion years ago about like the pasta fazool joke that I wrote a Filippo scene with the pasta fazool, and you know why? I didn't realize this. I was like, oh, I should just write as like a scene. The reason why is that, where pasta fazool, like the word, like in southern Italy and like in Sicily, in Neapolitan, the word for beans is fasule. It's soft, right? Fasule. And I guess in northern Italy, that's how you get fagioli, right? Pasta fagioli. But here they say pasta fazool because almost so much of the immigration to the United States from the Italian states was from Naples and Sicily. And Karen's like nodding her head over there because she's married to a Sicilian.
Yeah, there's actually a whole Sicilian dialect reason why my name is spelled the way it's spelled. So
we've had this conversation.
Fascinating.
Yes.
That's so cool.
So anyway,
I love that.
I don't know if it really answers this question or not. Yeah. Craving.
I think so. And so the question I had, I was asking those who are joining us, and I'll ask the three of you, do you like to read characters, or even if I know that Karen's also an author, do you like to read or create characters that are more like you or unlike you?
We should start with Marisa. I'll put you on the hot seat.
No problem. So I was thinking about this because I saw the questions as we were talking. And so I've been brainstorming, thinking the characters that I've really connected with, especially just as a reader, not even as an editorial person, are the ones who are more like me. And I think that's just because I feel like I can slip right into the characters' heads without even thinking. But much as we have seen in Rhonda's 2 books, the ones that really bring smiles to my faces and really make me eager to turn the page are the ones who are a little bit different, who perhaps have a little bit of spunkiness or are outspoken, which are all characteristics that I do not have. And so I read them thinking, that's amazing. I wish I could do that. But I never have to actually step too far out of my comfort zone if it was the main character. Karen and Rhonda, what about you?
I'll go to Karen.
Okay. I think it depends on what is different or what is the same. So I know when I'm writing that I will sometimes give a character very intentionally characteristics that I don't have but wish I had. Like one of my heroines she's a vampire, but she can run faster than the speed of sound. And that's because I have exercise-induced asthma and I cannot run at all. So I was just like, gosh darn it, I'm going to be in the head of somebody who can run, And so sometimes it's like I make them in, it's wish fulfillment, the difference is. But as far as reading, I think you have to have a certain amount in common with you have to at least be able to understand the perspective of the main character, to get where they're coming from. But sometimes it is really nice for that. But you don't want it to be exactly like yours, because then what's the point? It's like I'm in my own head all day long. I want to experience, something new, but it has to be at least relatable enough that I'm not like, what? Huh? People think this way, and maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I have to get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is it's a great question. And I think for In Pieces, and for the Molly Chase series, simply, so In Pieces has 4 points of view, as you guys have learned, right? Molly, Josiah, Sarah Robb, and Prudence. Adrift picks up 2 other points of view, drops 1, and then that point of view is coming back. It's very complicated. You have to read it. But anyway, the point being is I've had
There are
a lot
lots of spreadsheets.
You should. This is
Spreadsheets. Love it.
Sorry, I love you, Karen. Anyway,
I love you too.
Speaking of friendships.
She had the misfortune of editing this book. Editing Adrift. Anyway, but the point being is that it's been a really good exercise being in different points of view. And in particular, it's been really good being in a man's point of view. And this was something that had come out of out of the writing of In Pieces. And it's something I think that Catholic moms like ourselves would appreciate hearing, is that when I was drafting In Pieces, I would find myself struggling with a scene that was either involving Josiah or coming from his point of view. And I would talk to my husband, Jared, whose office I'm in. This is his office. He's an academic. All these books are not mine. I look very smart with them behind me. Anyway, it gets even better. So there's more over here. Anyway, but so I talked to Jared, and I would go through the scene, and I'm trying to explain what's going on and what I'm aiming at, and he would just listen and nod. And then eventually, once I stopped talking, hour later, he would say, "Yeah, a dude wouldn't do that." We're like,
that's all that needs to be said.
I know. And I'm like,
yep.
Okay. Well, I guess a dude wouldn't do that. But the really beautiful thing about this is that this was so good for my marriage. Writing this book was so good for my marriage, because I got to talk to my husband, and just getting on inside of Josiah's head and saying, what's driving whatever it is that he's looking at. I mean, it did end up being a very big exploration into theology of the body, just on a personal level. It's very good for my marriage, like I said. My husband is not Josiah. There are certain traits of Jared that you see in Josiah. He's a theologian. Obviously, this kind of comes out. My husband is not handy. He's not a sailor. And he doesn't have Josiah's temperament at all. They don't have the same temperament. But it is interesting just getting more inside of just men through just forcing myself to say okay, this is a man, and I'm going to think like a man.
So I'm gonna get to Barb's question in a minute, but Rhonda, I want you to answer Lisa's question, because it's timely to what you're saying. So Lisa wants to know, so do you take Jared's advice, or do you disregard it and write it the way you want? Because that's how you see this character. Great question, Lisa.
That is a great question. I think it just depends on what's going on. If he has an insight that I don't, and Jared has made many suggestions along the way where I was like, I don't know. And then he's made other suggestions where I was like, oh, that's exactly the thing I wanted, So it's more of just he knows how to ask clarifying questions, and that's helpful. And that's, I think, because he's a teacher, so it's helpful that I can say okay, I want this thing. Can you, and he'll ask just enough questions to be able to get that. The other thing that really helped, and this didn't come from Jared, but a friend of mine, and here's friendship, coming back to the theme of friendship, but let's put it on the man's side for a second. And it doesn't factor into part 2, because if anybody has noticed, Josiah does not have a point of view in part 2. He is gone. Anybody notice that? I wanted everybody to feel his absence. He is not there. Just wait for part 3. But anyway, but in part 1, we meet just Josiah's friends. And my friend, a friend of mine, a girlfriend of mine, who was one of my earliest readers, one of my best beta readers, had said, oh, Josiah, we're seeing Josiah too much from the women. we need some other points of view, or at least we need some other sounding boards for him in order to understand him better. And that is when I added Prudence, who does not like Josiah. And that is when I was inspired to have the characters of Mark Finley and George Peterson, in addition to Josiah's shipmates. And I will, without giving too many things away, Mark Finley is the biggest surprise of my writing of this entire series in terms of what he became. So keep an eye, keep an eye out for that. So
we love Mark.
Mark Finley too.
We love Mark. This is a Mark mug. This is from the Drift. It says, "I'm a lover, not an imbecile." And that has context. Anyway.
I love that.
Yeah.
That is great. So getting back to Barb's question, which of the female characters was the most difficult to bring to life on the page?
It sounds horrible. Molly. She's the one who the whole book's about Molly. And I think Molly is a trauma victim. And that automatically just makes her like a very difficult character to write, because there's this kind of constant battle. And you see this in part 2 that we're discussing tonight, where it's like, she comes in, she's not well, right? We've met Molly. There's many things going on with Molly, but she's kind of and we don't know what a healthy Molly looks like. We open up this book with an unhealthy Molly, so we don't actually know what she does, but she wants to get better. And we see that from the first page. She wants to get better. She wants to do her mantra making. She's going to be happy. She's going to do what she's going to do to be happy. And she comes back to that again, right? In part 1, she's like, I think I should be working for pay. I'm good at this. Like, I don't have to be helpless. I could work for pay. And then she says, oh, and by the way, can you teach me how to keep house? Because I don't actually know anything. And like, this is like really important.
Those lessons.
Oh, well, I know. Oh, this is rough. Like, this is like the best woman to learn this from, like, seriously, like, the woman's got like she doesn't make French pastry. Like, this is the person you want to learn this from, like, she's frugal, she's tidy, she cooks well, like, she cooks and she bakes. Like, this is the right person. And she's like, but this is important, right? She wants agency. And so like, as soon as we get into part 2, all of a sudden, like, her agency keeps getting thwarted. And that's really hard. Like, first of all, because there's certain aspects of Molly that, like, personality wise, I share with myself, and I didn't have like quite as much objectivity on her as I would have with Prudence or Sarah Robb. Like, I couldn't, I just like too much in it or whatever. She's not me. It's not autobiographical, but there's certain aspects of her that I just like, okay, I couldn't see around it. But then the other piece of it was that you're constantly having to say, like, Molly's constantly having to reassert herself, and then having that rug pulled out from underneath her, right? Beginning with, the girlfriends, right? And we get Tabitha Breyer, why are you working? You're an idiot. Like, have you not gotten the memo, Molly? Because is there something, and this was something I had realized also with Molly, is that in the drafting of In Pieces, I was like, why are these people talking about her? Like, why does this even matter? Like, why are they so petty? And it dawned on me logically that Molly was not just pretty. Molly was a hottie. Molly is a curvy girl. And we all know the difference there is. And the more I've talked to girls who, especially girls, it's like, I think you have this, it's like I've had this confirmed by people who are a little bit bigger on top, is that there is an automatic assumption that they are immodest people. And it is just latent right underneath that. And so you have this dynamic. And so it was interesting to me where it was like, we see that at work when early in part 1, when we have the scene in the churchyard and Josiah is, in Mark Finley and George Peterson, Mark Finley's teasing him and George Peterson is jealous, right? And Mark kind of gives the rundown of what Molly is to the men. And then we come back around with the girlfriends, and we have Tabitha saying, like, what are you doing? Like, you don't have to make money. You just need to get married, because everybody in this town is, you know, like every single guy in this town thinks you're hot. They all want to marry you. And so we get this, like, and then it gets this agency, it gets kind of undermined. So that was always very difficult for me to put her on the page, you know, and try to like figure out how to do that without her coming across always as helpless. Anyway, that was very long. Somebody else. Your turn.
Well, I loved the fact that the friends, and it's not just Tabitha, well, Joy is engaged. So she is kind of outside of what I'm going to say. But because Molly is the hottie, even though they love her, it's true that they know they're not getting married until Molly is off the market, because every man in town is after Molly. And so they, even Prudence, who is really not husband hunting at all and has basically resigned herself to the fact that she doesn't really want to be married to at least any of these men who are around her, you know, but she still understands that nobody is going to notice her as long as Molly is single. And so it's even the people who love her who are, to a certain extent, they have incentive to undermine her agency and, you know, just get Molly off the market, and then the rest of us can finally find husbands.
Yeah,
that is an interesting dynamic in friendships that I think that, Rhonda, that you've brought out is the underlying motivation of the way we interact with some of our friends. And I don't think sometimes it is on purpose. Like, I don't think sometimes even some women know that this is how they're acting. I know in my own life, I've had experiences where I have given somebody advice and then realized later, oh, because it was self-serving, but I didn't realize it was self-serving. It was almost like a way of kind of getting that person to move on with their life so they would stop needing me so much. And I thought, oh, that's a terrible way to. So looking at your characters now, listening to you speak to each other and bring them even further to life, I'm like, okay, this is a real construct of a person, of a woman who doesn't mean to kind of give that bad advice or kind of push somebody in the direction that's maybe not the best for them, because they have that kind of underlying motive that maybe they're not even aware of. Would you say that you would recognize that, or if any thoughts on any of that from you guys?
I think so. I mean, definitely Tabitha. Right. I mean, this is she's the one who makes the suggestion to go husband hunting, which Sarah Robb says is basically akin to prostitution. And I mean, it's basically what I mean. Sarah Robb doesn't mince words. I mean, she doesn't say that out loud to Molly. She says that to herself. But you know, but I think it's, you know, Tabitha's definitely, you know, she's the one who makes that suggestion. She's the one who's kind of that, you know, the one who's definitely has the most jealousy. Prudence, but I think part of what's going on though is that nobody knows what's really going on with Molly. You know, so yes, she's grieving. Okay, her father died. Okay, that's very sad, right? It's very sad. But like nobody really understands that she's actually not well. And so, and I don't think many people have the perspective of someone like a Sarah Robb who would say, no, she needs to stand on her own 2 feet for a while, because that's going to be part of her healing. And even Molly understands that to a certain degree, right? I mean, so so I think there's definitely like, there's this place where it's like, Molly has not confided in these friends. And so therefore these friends are going to look at her situation with a limited, they have a limited amount of information, and then they're going to make their decisions based on that. And Prudence makes her own, which we could go into at some point. So, yeah.
Any other thoughts on the friends or these characters before we move on to the next topic for tonight?
I mean, I guess maybe one thing, maybe just to bring up, and maybe you could segue into it. I don't know what the next question is, but I was thinking Prudence also, and then coming back to Prudence, Prudence has Molly's best interest at heart. So if Tabitha is acting out of self-interest, Prudence is not acting out of self-interest, but she still has the limited vantage point. She doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so when her brother starts making moves and making inroads, Prudence starts throwing out, like, you know, I don't know. I've lost my words right now. Is it 7? It is 7:40 at night, and we are old women. It starts. Should say that I'm middle-aged. I am over the hill.
You're younger than me.
It's my bedtime. My bedtime. But anyway, but like it's you know, she tries to derail her brother's attempts. Now this ends up backfiring on her, but you know, but she is at least acting out of Molly's good.
So Maria has a question for you before we move to the next question that I have for you. So Lisa, Hendy, and Maria both write fiction, and they've laughed about how their characters. About our characters hauling off and having conversations in their heads. Do you ever find them running rampant in your mind, even when you aren't writing?
Yes, and especially when I'm in it. Like, so right now I'm working on book 3, and I've like set aside everything else to finish book 3, and it's like, yeah, so the movie screen is definitely going. Yeah, definitely. And you know this, I mean, you know this, Maria, and I think a lot of fiction writers know this. It's like they have a mind of their own, and they do say things that you're like, oh, that was unexpected, you know, and you're just like, okay, I'm just here to record it. Yeah.
So Rosa, I have a question for you as the editor. Do these characters start taking over your brain? Do they start talking to you about how you can make them sound better?
Yes, it depends on what level of editing that you're working on. And I'm sure Karen can identify this as well, both as an author and an editor. And that is, you have to have a fine tune with your computer screen, your red pen, whatever you're working with. And the longer you go through the editorial process, I find it particularly with round 2, line editing, you get to know them better and you get to understand the author's voice better. That's the overarching word with it, because you have to know the balance between striking what is necessary to tighten the prose, say, you know, one of the many aspects of that round, versus letting those characters speak through the author. And in particular with historical books, that can be very challenging because you have to try to figure out what the author's intentions of what was put in there for a purpose versus what can just be extraneous. The dropping of the R's with the Boston accent could in particular be a good example of that. So while editors might not have it as much as the authors do, perhaps if the manuscript isn't right in front of you, it does happen just as much for us.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I mean, and it's interesting. And speaking of spreadsheets, Rhonda has a chart for contractions. This is like one of my tags.
Rhonda has a chart for everything.
Rhonda has a chart.
It's good because I don't do charts, so it works.
Well, so I have a chart. Well, this was Rosanna White, who is co-owner of Whitefire Publishing, very dear friend, also a best-selling historical fiction author. And she and her husband converted after we started Chrism.
They're both creative geniuses.
They are. They're together.
Yes,
they are. Anyway, Rosanna, years ago, I was like asking her about contractions, and she's like, "Oh yeah, years ago she wrote something around this time, set in this time period." And she's like, "Oh, I just did all this research, scanning the National Archives for all the founding documents for like how the founding fathers used contractions." And so I took that and then like went to town on it, and I had like so much fun, and like came out, the end result was that I came out with a chart for each of my characters for characterization based on how many contractions they used and what kind of contractions they used. It's nerdy. Nobody else would do this. But you'll see it, like the men will use more contractions, especially with each other. This is a port town. Nautical language has a lot of contraction usage. I mean, it's just rife with it. Mrs. Robb, every single contraction is taken out if I can at all help it. So that's like my stand, like, you know. So anyway, so yeah, there's certain things like that which
that needs to be a free download.
Nerd Central.
Rhonda, that needs to be a free downloadable for anybody who comes to your website, because we all want to see that.
I think I've got it on a blog post somewhere. I'll try to, I'll put it in the show notes or something in the comments.
So, is that going to be bonus content? Barb wants to know. Okay, so I've typed in the word for those who are not. I've never heard of this until I read your book, and so I want you to tell us. So Molly is a Mantua. How do I say
Mantua? Mantua. I say Mantua. I put a ch in there. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. Mantua maker. Karen, you're like actual language person. I'm not, despite all of Josiah's languages.
What's the etymology? What language does it come from?
I think Italian. I think.
Mantua.
Because it's Mantua. Yeah. So it's before you have, I think like 16th century, that's what it was called. Like your gown is called a mantua. Mantua, I say it, whatever. So anyway, yeah, so the name stuck around, but it's essentially seamstress. But the name was in use. That was the name in use at the time. So what is her exact skill? Like, what is it that she is the best at that she should be getting money for in her mind? So making clothing. So this is like one of these interesting things about the 18th century is that you don't like, obviously you can't go to Walmart and get something that was sewn, by like in mass production, right? Like you can't do that. So like everybody had to have somebody else sew their clothing for them to a certain degree, or at least the fitting of it had to happen with other people. So the way that they would make clothing is that you would go and you would strip down to your underwear. So you would have for a woman, you'd have your shift on, and then you'd have your stays, your corset. And then they would take the fabric and they would drape it to you and cut it to you and pin it on your body. So everything is fit to the person. And this is actually one of the trades. It's a working trade that was woman owned and operated. It's one of the few historically. And the reason for that becomes very obvious for Molly later on, because as you know, she's making a suit for Josiah. Tailors were men, also for a reason. And I think at some point she's like, oh, right. Everything's fit to the person. I can't fit this to you. And his mother ends up having to like fit his clothing for him. And this is like it never occurs to her. This is like part of like we throw in a little sexual tension there, but like it's actually important, right, for Molly that she's like all of a sudden sees him as a man, right? Like, oh, dang. And that's a little bit of a spoiler, but like it's important for her, right? She sees him as a brother, she sees him as a friend, she sees him as any number of things. Well, not her brother, because that's like their thing. She's not my brother. Yeah. So a mantua makers are women. And so the only thing that women didn't necessarily do for their own clothing was their stays. Stay makers, I think, were often men. And sometimes the tailors would do the stays. And I think it's mostly just the sewing because there's a lot of boning in it and it's pretty hard on the hands. So I think you just need a lot of strength for it if you're hand sewing that stuff. But I don't actually know the real reason for that. But anyway, yeah. So for her, it's a matter of being able to create clothing and make it beautiful. But then for Molly, this takes on an extra dimension that not only is she good at it, not only does she enjoy it, but it takes on the dimension of artistry because her mother has taught her that this is an opportunity, not only for making someone beautiful, but seeing them and trying to take clothing to reflect something about the interior of that person and to bring out the very best in them. And so she does this at the beginning of part 2, tonight's reading. She does this with Deb, right? Is that Deb also has jealousy. Not just Tabitha. Deb is jealous of Molly. And we learn that in the second chapter with Josiah and his sister, right? And it's like, oh, my sister, right? But like, she's jealous. And Molly sees this as an opportunity of like, she sees all the insecurity and it takes her a moment. She's like, stop, let me think about this. And she's like, figures out the insecurity and then figures out like in her own brain, she's like, gosh, she has so many lovely features that she really ought to, some mantra maker really ought to just, give her like, she just needs a little makeover here and like bring out those nice features. Oh, wait a second. I'm a mantra. like I should make her something. like, ding. Right. But this is part of like that for Molly's mother, that this was an opportunity for teaching Molly how to look beyond herself. And she needed that. I mean, you think about this and it's like we could cut a little glimpses here and there of Molly as a girl. Mrs. Robb said she was spoiled. Molly herself said she was naughty. We know that she and Josiah were naughty together, but like Molly actually said she was like a stinker, but then we also have this fact that she's like, as we said, logically, Rhonda, the author, logically deduced that she wasn't just a pretty girl, she was hot. And like this is like a really dangerous place for a young woman to be because it could tip one way or the other. And that when you have that much attention on you, which way are you going to go? And her mother directs it toward other people. So it's just a brilliant move. I wish I was Mary Chase sometimes. Yes. Anyway, that was also long-winded. Rhonda could talk about this for a long time.
Well, so it's fascinating. I wish like every book I read, I could go and just listen to the author tell me all about their thought process. Karen and Marissa, do either one of you want to weigh in on what Rhonda just shared?
I think what Rhonda was just speaking about, in particular with Molly and Deb, was one of the parts that I enjoyed most about the book, because for me, that was really a turning point in Molly's character. She did have such a dark place to come from. She had such challenges to overcome, but her maturation there with using her artistry to really go beyond and see the heart of the person that she was working with really, for me, reflected Molly's inner faith. She might not have been Catholic at that point, or even having been in the position to discuss those topics yet with Josiah or Mrs. Robb, but that was a way of that type of theology coming out for me. And that really made me like Molly a whole lot more and helped me identify with her. She might have been living in the late 1700s Boston, but every young lady, at least that I have ever interacted with, has come up against this point of, what are my skills? What are my passions? How am I going to do something good for it and give back? And so it just felt like reading something that a young lady today would go through, just set in a historical setting. I really liked that about her.
That's very insightful. Karen, anything for this section?
I just think that from a literary standpoint, as opposed to like a character, getting just into the character standpoint, the mantua making was huge in this book because it helps to externalize the internal, and just in that, because you can see what Molly is thinking and feeling through the clothing that she is creating. And it works for her personally, you know, as Rhonda mentioned, as a way of healing, but it also works for us as readers and for the book, because that's actually how Rhonda structured the book, is she titled each section based on what Molly was either wearing or making in that, you know. So part 1 was Black Bombazine, and I am drawing a complete blank on the title of part 2 that we read tonight. What was it, Rhonda?
Mismeasurement.
Mismeasurement.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but we can, she was, and this was a brilliant thing on Rhonda's part, was to use Molly's art to express, you know, the whole arc of the story.
Rhonda, is that a play on words? Mismeasurement?
Yes, it is.
That's so fun. I love that. I'm like, maybe I'm just reading into this, no pun intended, but like that seems like
I am not above puns.
Oh no.
Oh no. Oh no.
That's fantastic.
I am not above puns.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That.
I mean, it was a lot of fun to do. Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun to learn this too. I am not a fashionista. So another thing I do not share with Molly. In fact, all of the talents that my characters have in this book are talents I don't have and kind of wish I did. So speaking of Karen's, Jennifer.
Yeah, like running.
You're running, yes. But yeah, I think it's, you know, I did get to learn a lot about the fashion of this time period. The 1790s are really interesting, or what are called a transitional time period. The French Revolution had a huge impact on women's fashions and men's fashions too, but women's fashions in particular.
Men's fashions too.
Yeah. And so it's slowly seeping in. The big change is 1794. That's when you see all the women's fashions change. It's just like, so when Molly, in the opening of the book, she's like, you know, she's like, I have this fashion baby, the doll that has the fashion on it. They do little miniature clothing, and that's how they would share what the fashion was that they were working with. Yeah, there's just these little dolls, and they had their little clothes, and the mantua maker would look at it and say, okay, I see what they're doing there. You know, I mean, you don't have patterns. So anyway, so they would do this, and but you see in the beginning of the book, I did a little bit of a historical, you know, novelist, took some liberties, and I gave her the fashion that hits in 1794 in all the fashion plates, all the prints you find, all of this, and that is the round gown. And all of a sudden now you've got the waist. The waist rises to right underneath the bosom. And this is what you see in all the Jane Austen. You know, this is basically it's not the exact same as the ones that are like the later Jane Austens, but like it's basically the same kind of idea, is that the silhouette changes. And I have it saying, you know, she has this fashion baby, and her father's fabric textile suppliers like, yeah, you know, it's some mantua maker's experiment. Nobody's wearing it yet. You know, I mean, it's so, you know, that's how I fictionalized that for myself, just because I wanted to show the transition. Yeah, so it's a really interesting period.
This is what I love about historic fiction, is that there's so much happening. You know, like it's fiction, but yet it really gives you this beautiful look, a different kind of look than just reading a history book, into what the world once looked like. And you just do such a beautiful, beautiful job of bringing these people, these characters, this time period to life. And I'm so excited that we have 2 more weeks to continue our conversation with these wonderful ladies from Chrism Press. We have been talking about In Pieces, again, from Chrism Press. Rhonda's going to show her the gorgeous cover from Rhonda Ortiz. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us again to talk about Molly Chase and all these incredible characters. Thank you for those who joined us online. Thank you for your questions and your interactions. This has been wonderful. We hope that you will join us again next Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, for part 3. Again, if you're not reading the book, Why not? Just kidding. But but not
What?
kidding. But not kidding. We really invite you because sometimes, I think that these conversations, like I read the book and, this makes me want to go back and reread the book. Like, what have I missed? Like, what could, reading further into it. A good book is one that you can read over and over again. And In Pieces by Rhonda Ortiz is definitely a good book. So thank you all for being with us. You can find more information over on CatholicMom.com, and we will see you next Thursday for part 3 of our Catholic Mom Book Club. God bless, and thank you all for being with us.
Good night.
Thank you.